Teresa was 56 years old, a widow worn down by time but never stripped of her determination. She had only her two sons in this world, Marco and Paolo. They lived in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Toluca, in the state of Mexico. Their house was small, its walls uneven, and its roof made of metal sheets. She and her husband had built it brick by brick over long years of hardship. He had worked as a construction laborer, leaving before dawn and returning at sunset, carrying the weight of the day on his shoulders while leaving behind just enough at home to keep hope alive. And then, in a single day, everything changed. Her husband died in a workplace accident when a structure collapsed at the site where he was working. There was no fair compensation, no swift justice, no one to defend a widow and her two children. There was only heavy silence and growing debt. From that day on, Teresa became both mother and father. They had no shop, no savings, no support. All that remained was the house and a small piece of land her husband had inherited on the edge of town. Every dawn awakened her loneliness and reminded her of what she had lost. But it also reminded her of her only mission, to raise her sons with dignity. And if there was one thing she never allowed to fade, it was Marco and Paolo's dream. She woke up every day at 4 a.m. She lit the fire, prepared tamales, atole, and simple sweet bread, then went to the neighborhood market to sell what she had made. The steam from the atole fogged her glasses, and the heat of the griddle burned her fingertips, but she never complained. She would call out gently through the crowd, "Hot tamales," and smile as if exhaustion could not touch her. Sometimes she returned home with swollen feet from standing all day. Sometimes she came back without tasting a single bite herself, but she always returned with enough for her sons to eat before school. At night, when the electricity was cut off because she could not afford the bill, Marco and Paolo did their homework by candlelight. One night, Marco suddenly looked up and said, "I want to be a pilot." Teresa paused her sewing under the dim light. A pilot. Such a big, distant, expensive word. She asked calmly, trying not to show her fear. "A pilot, my son?" He answered with the certainty of a child who truly sees the sky, not just dreams of it. "Yes, I want to fly big airplanes, like the ones that take off from Mexico City." Teresa smiled, though her heart tightened inside. She knew that studying aviation was no ordinary path. It was long and costly. Yet, she said, as if placing a promise upon her own shoulders, "Then you will fly, my son, and I will help you." The years passed. The boys finished high school and were accepted into flight school. That was when Teresa made the hardest decision of her life. She sold the house. She sold the land. She sold the last physical memory that connected her to her husband. "Where will we live, Mom?" Paolo asked, shock and fear in his voice. She took a deep breath, swallowing her pain so no one would see it. Anywhere, as long as you study. They moved into a small rented room near the market. The bathroom was shared with other families, and the roof leaked whenever it rained. There, Teresa worked at anything she could find, washing clothes for others, cleaning houses in wealthier neighborhoods, continuing to sell tamales in the morning, and sometimes sewing school uniforms for a small wage. Her hands became cracked, and her back ached every night. But she never allowed one thing to happen: her sons quitting school. Marco graduated first, then Paolo shortly after. But becoming a commercial pilot did not end with a diploma. They needed flight hours, additional certifications, and experience that was not easily granted. Then an opportunity came, but it was far away. They found work abroad for years to accumulate the required flight hours. Before leaving from Benito Juarez International Airport, they hugged their mother tightly. "Mom, we'll come back," Marco said, holding back tears. "When we achieve our dream, you'll be the first to fly with us," Paolo promised. Teresa held them close. "Don't worry about me. Just stay safe." Then the years of waiting began. 20 years. 20 years of occasional phone calls, short voice messages, and video calls she learned to use with a neighbor's help. 20 years of birthdays spent alone, of simple meals with 2 empty seats she would glance at in silence. Whenever she heard an airplane overhead, she stepped outside, lifted her head, and stared at the distant speck in the sky. "Maybe one of them is up there," she would whisper. Her hair turned completely white. Her steps slowed. But her hope never died. One ordinary morning, while sweeping the entrance of her modest home, a house she had managed to buy again after many years of saving and hard work, there was a knock at the door. She assumed it was a neighbor. She opened it, and her breath stopped. 2 tall men stood before her in pilot uniforms, shiny badges on their chests, confident as the figures she used to see on television. "Mom," one of them said, his voice trembling. It was Marco, and beside him was Paolo. She raised her hands to her face, afraid it might be a dream. "Is it really you? Have you truly come back?" She embraced them as if time had frozen, as if 20 years had been nothing more than a long night. "We're back, Mom," Paolo said, wiping his tears. "And this time, we're not leaving for long." The next day they took her to Benito Juarez International Airport. She walked slowly, looking around in awe, like a child entering another world. "Am I really going to board the plane?" she asked softly. Marco smiled. "You're not just boarding. Today, you're our guest of honor." She sat in her seat, hands trembling on the seatbelt. She stared at the aisle, the lights, the small windows, everything that had once seemed so far away from the ground where she had stood all her life. Before takeoff, Marco picked up the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a woman on board who made our presence here possible. She is our mother. She sold everything she owned so we could study aviation. This flight is dedicated to her." Then Paolo added, his voice blending strength and tears, "The bravest woman we know is neither famous nor wealthy. She is simply a mother who believed in us when we had nothing." The cabin filled with applause. Some passengers wiped their tears. Teresa wept silently, and when the plane lifted off the ground, she closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm flying." But the flight was not the greatest surprise. After landing, they did not take her straight to the arrival hall. Instead, they guided her to a nearby area outside the airport. There stood a beautiful white house with a small garden and an elegant iron gate. On the wooden sign at the entrance were the words, "Teresa's home." She stopped. She could not comprehend what she was seeing. "You sold your house for our dream," Marco said, placing a key in her hand. "We wanted to give you one back, with your name on it." She shook her head in disbelief and sat down, crying deeply. Inside, there was a bright kitchen, a comfortable bedroom, and a large framed photograph of her late husband on the wall. She touched the picture gently. "They made it," she whispered. "We're not done yet, Mom," Paolo said. He handed her an envelope. Inside were the ownership papers for the very piece of land her husband had once sold in Toluca, now bought back in her name. She felt the circle complete. The sacrifice had not been in vain. The years had not been wasted. With time, she no longer woke before dawn to sell tamales. She watered the flowers in her garden, drank her coffee peacefully, and watched airplanes pass above her home. She no longer stepped outside with longing whenever she heard one, because now she knew her sons were truly up there, and she was no longer waiting. One evening, she lifted her face to the sky and smiled the smile of a woman who had triumphed over poverty, loneliness, and time. And she whispered, "I am flying, but this time it is my heart that soars."